Hey, y'all. Brian and Steven back again with episode number 5. I am happy to be back in the saddle. I was spent the previous week over at Disney World with my family. So, Steven, I heard you had a fun episode with Mike, our father.
Yeah, we sure did. I know he loved it, and it was great to have him on the podcast, right? Some years of wisdom there for sure. And he had a lot of really, really good things to add to that episode, which was all about, what to look for when you're searching for a lot, for your ideal lot to build your custom home on. So, yeah, great episode. Of course, we missed you, but we're glad to have you back and glad to hear that you had a great time in Disney with the family. So,
well, I haven't listened to the episode, so I will just wait until it's published and listen like the rest of our viewers or listeners when it comes out. So it'll be a surprise for me as well.
There you go. Yeah, maybe you'll learn something too. Actually, I joke about that, but yeah, he even had some things that I was like, oh, you know what? That's a really good thought. Something that maybe I hadn't thought of in the past, but definitely good stuff to know.
You know what? We don't know it all, but that's why we're going to bring more guests on in the future. So good stuff. So let's jump into this week. Selecting what we want to cover today is discussing how to select a builder and what that entails. There's a lot of different ways of going about selecting a builder. We have touched on this and previously, and we'll touch on it in the future of when, but really want to cover how, some things to think about, some questions to ask, which we will elaborate on in probably a subsequent episode of just some of the top questions, because there's hundreds of questions you could ask any one of the builders. But for the sake of time for you, when you're going through this interview process with potential builders, you probably don't have the time to ask every single one of them 100, 200, 300 questions, because there can be a lot. So what we want to do is really narrow that down and just give you an overview of things to look for, things to think about. So, Steven, you want to start us off and just talk about really where you should begin in selecting a builder?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this one's pretty basic, but the first thing you want to do is figure out your target area of where you're going to be building, right? And last episode we covered that, what to look for in your target area, and then also in particular, where your lot is. Is it in a neighborhood, stuff like that? But once you've got that narrowed down, of course, builders are pretty local. There's only a handful of builders usually that are building in a particular area. Now, if you're in a huge metropolitan area like Austin, Texas, or Nashville, Tennessee, you're going to have a lot more to choose from. But what you want to do, and to get to your question, Brian, is to really start by gathering a list of potential builders, right? That's, of course, the easiest and best place to start. And once you have that list, you have something that you can go off of, right? So I would say that's pretty much step number one. And as basic as it sounds, there's several ways you can do that, right? So I think you can probably add some here too. But, a couple popular ones, of course, is going to be just a local Google search, right? Get on Google, search for custom home builder near me, or custom home builder Austin, Texas, or, wherever your local place is. And, that's going to be a good place to start. That's going to give you a list of people. It's going to have the ratings and stuff, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And you can go from there, right? Another place that you could look for builders is going to be on your local building association website. So for us, we're in a couple different building associations. So we've got, the Austin Home Builders Association. And so with that, you can get on their website. They have a trades list and a lot of good, useful information through there of builders that have been members of that organization, right? So that's just an example for Austin, but almost every, metropolitan area has a builders association that you could look for builders. So what do you think, Brian? I mean, any places that I'm missing that would be a really good place to search for other builders?
I think that's a great place. Obviously, Google, the Home Builders Associations, as Steven alluded to, is a fantastic place, because typically the premier and or top custom home builders are finding value in being a part of those organizations. So you can already pick up on some a credibility with them. The other thing that is important to think about during this process is almost if you're an Excel person or some matrix or some format to you've gathered your list of builders, but then you lay out what am I looking for? What are the pros and cons of each one of these builders? Maybe you build that out in Excel. Maybe it's on a piece of paper, right? It doesn't have to be anything pretty or super formal, but you do want some way to start to not only just take notes, but be able to easily compare the pros and cons of the builders you're talking to.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point because if you start talking to a handful of them, you're going to forget, who said that or who was doing this or, which one did I like better? Maybe have a simple grading system, right? Go back to grade school and have, an A through F system or something like that, right? So that you can compare different builders on different metrics and, really help narrow down the one that's going to be right for you. Now, I want to jump back real quick and say that another place that you can find builders or that you can add to those lists is going to be word of mouth. So if you know people that are in the area that you want to build, they could be a great place to start, right? Hey, do you know any custom home builders or did you build your home custom? Were you happy with your process? People love to talk, right? And what better way to find a builder than through some of your best friends that you trust the most, right? If it's somebody that they liked, it's probably going to be somebody that you would like as well, right? Not always, but a good place to start. So I would say word of mouth is a good one. And that's another way to find a builder.
This isn't the last time you'll hear the word trust in this podcast.
Yeah, there we go. I think hopefully that kind of gets this ball rolling, right? So jumping into the next point, once you've got that list, Brian, what are some, probably the next best way for people to start narrowing down that list, right? They've got a list of maybe 10, 15, 20, however many builders it is, right? Maybe it's not even that many because the options aren't that vast in their area, but how do you start narrowing that down?
Of course, naturally, you're going to, and I think you're going to go this way, but we want to note this and document this. You're going to start to do your initial research and vetting those companies. And some of them you may be able to scratch off the list fairly quickly, but you're documenting that, understanding why you just say, hey, I'm not going to reach out to this builder. I am going to reach out to this builder. So this is the initial research, or you could call it the phase one research, if you will, where you are shortening your list of potential builders, maybe just based off of their online presence, maybe just based off of the reviews that they have on Google or Houzz or wherever it may be, where you can see some of their testimonials, their website. I'm sure most builders aren't going to put negative reviews on their website, but you can still get a sense of it on some of the other reviews, places where reviews are. Referrals, as you mentioned, are a big one. Credentials and experience, right? Typically you can go to their website and find that. And so I think from there that can be a fairly quick process of just researching the company with whatever they have as their online presence. Another good place that we'll touch on is their social media presence, right? In today's world, if you are a custom home builder and you don't have a social media presence, it doesn't mean that you're bad, but to me, I think it just shows that, hey, what are they doing? And it gives you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about their style and progress, and even sometimes about their personal life, and just being able to feel like you're connecting with that builder even before you've ever reached out to them to say, hey, I might be interested in building a custom home. So while social media is a small thing, it can be a really big thing. And not that we would ever encourage any of our homeowners or potential clients to make a decision on us or anybody based off of what's on social media. It can really give you I use the word feel. It can really give you a good feel on who is this builder beyond just what they put on a website, which typically is much more static than social media. And if they have a social media platform but they haven't posted in a year, okay, well, again, not a red flag, but just could they? And I think you just learn more about the builder with social media. So I don't want to dive too deep into that, but I think that's the next step is do your initial research, and that's what you're naturally probably going to do before you ever reach out to any builder.
Yep. Love it or hate it, right? Social media is a huge part of any decision-making process. I feel like in something that, especially as a decision this big, right? You're not going to make a decision without checking out their social media if they have it, right? Some builders don't even have social media. Not that that's a red flag, like Brian said, but something that you just want to be aware of. And the ones that do, it's kind of nice, right? You get to see more about their company, their culture, who they are, the style that they're building, all those things that Brian already mentioned. So it can be a really useful tool. And in this day and age, online presence is really important. So, it's something that helps, and it can be a useful tool as you're narrowing down those builders. So, I think I want to touch on this next one because this is something that you've told me in the past, Brian, but you can learn a lot about a company when you're going through the interview process, whether that's, you looking for a job and you're interviewing with a corporate company that you're about to start a job with them, or even if you're a client looking for a custom home builder, right? The interview process or the preliminary talks, you learn a lot about a company, right? If they're slow to get back to you, if they're unorganized and forget your name and don't have all the stuff that you've talked about previously documented and don't know where you left off on your last conversations, and they're just not easy to talk to, those are all red flags, right? And complete opposite of that, if they're quick to get back to you, if they're organized, they make you feel like you're being heard, they're really narrowing in on your wants and your needs, and their communication style and process is really smooth, probably going to continue throughout the rest of the build and the rest of the process. So you've always told me that, and that's something that stuck with me, but I think that's really, really relevant here as well when you're searching for a custom home builder. Anything you want to add to that?
First impressions are everything. And you said that that you can just tell a whole lot by first impressions. What do they say? How do they say it? And the timeliness of their responses. So as you're reaching out to the builders that you have put on your we'll call it your short list after your initial research before reaching out, those are all things you're looking for. And what this becomes is the beginning of how do I, again, and I shouldn't say the beginning, a continued extension from your thoughts and perception of this particular builder or company from just their online presence, right? Call that social media, call it whatever you want, anything that is online. This is the extension of, okay, do they back it up? And do I have the same feelings, thoughts, just gut feel about this company when I reach out? Or does my gut reaction change because of those first impressions? So a really, really, really big piece as we talk about here towards the end of this, just the trust, right? You have to have trust in the builder that you choose. And if you have begun conversations and there's anything that that you question with trusting them, it's going to be harder to earn that trust again later on, right? Because you're already questioning something. So it's a very, very important piece and something that we don't want to overlook.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people just throughout life, you realize who you can trust and who you can't, right? And as you get older, I think you get better at, like you said, first impressions and kind of gauging who people are and how they interact with you and how they talk and their morals and their values, and those are all important things, right? So in friendships, in business relationships, no matter what it is, but building a custom home is a business relationship. And a lot of times for us, it turns into a friendship, right? So throughout the process of the preliminary work, we spend a lot of time with these clients. And then as we're building their homes, we really do. We learn a lot about their lives and their families and all kinds of stuff that they become pretty close to us, right? By the time they move in, it's somebody that we trust, they trust us, it's a good relationship. And there's nothing worse than I can imagine getting into a build with somebody you're unsure about. And then you get to the end and you're absolutely sure that it wasn't the right decision, and it's just been a miserable year-long build process. So, I think you can tell pretty early on, hopefully, that somebody either feels right or they don't, right? Whether that's the custom home builder or whatever, right? But I think hopefully that touches on that point pretty well. So any final thoughts there as we move on to the next one?
I'm gonna make an attempt at a poor analogy, and because I haven't been here in 12, 15 years, something like that, because I'm happily married, but it's similar to the dating scene, and that you're just it either feels right or it doesn't, and it's like I'm gonna move on, and you don't always have to explain it, and that's what this comes down to, right? I mean, it's a big decision that we mention quite often, but my poor analogy, it's similar to dating.
Yep, I think that's good. That's good, right? Well, cool. I guess the next topic that we want to cover on this selecting a builder is going to be, something that's important, but it also is as equally important that we're comparing apples to apples here. So one of the big things, and I know everybody thinks about it as they're getting into this process, but understanding a builder's pricing structure, right? And builders have so many different ways, or they spin even the two most common ways of pricing a custom home build a lot of different ways, right? So it can be very confusing. And the reason we want to bring this up at this point is because as you're vetting builders, a lot of people want to just know, hey, what's your price, right? What's your price per square foot? How much is this house going to cost me? How much does it cost you to build my house, right? And I don't know that that's a very fair question. And, I think that's why we want to touch on it at this point in the process, is that it's so much more important that you find a builder that you can trust than just going with the cheapest quote or estimate that they give you at that point, or even just the builder that throws out a number and hopes that it's right. There's a lot of that going on, unfortunately, in this industry, that a price that early on, typically without a plan set, without knowing the lot, without knowing all the background details of your particular build on your particular lot, is really just kind of a shot in the dark at the total price that your build is going to come in at, right? So that's why we bring this up. And you really want to make sure that whatever these builders are quoting you or giving you estimates on is truly comparing apples to apples, right? And we bring that up at this point because you can ask your builder or the builders that are on your short list how they're pricing their projects. And, they should be able to very clearly talk you through that process of, okay, we do fixed price contracts, or we do cost plus contracts. Here's what you can expect throughout the process. Here's what we do as far as construction draws or construction loans, or maybe you're paying cash, right? They talk you through that whole scenario. And a builder that can't answer that efficiently is somebody that you probably want to be a little bit weary about. So, as you're getting through these short list of builders, just make sure that, you're asking these questions on how they price, not necessarily what is your price, right? And then once you get further along, we'll have another podcast, and hopefully, as you're going through this series, we touch on it at the right time, that you can ask them, what is your price, at that time. But right now it's more about the pricing structure. So what do you want to add there, Brian?
This is a huge, huge piece. Just when we discuss pricing, which understandably and certainly is a very important part of you looking at making a final decision. But to Stephen's point, the decision needs to be made after you have enough information, which is much, much more than just, well, what is your price? Because You mentioned that, hey, it's not a fair question. It is a fair question at the right point. But at this point, when you're still interviewing builders, fully understand and can appreciate the fact that you want to know, but understand that the responses are going to be all over the board. And in a way, the responses could be unfair to you in steering you potentially to the wrong builder when it might just seem like the right builder because of how they answered this question. So you have to look at much, much more than just, well, what's the price, what's your price. And you talk about comparing apples to apples. We absolutely need to put this in its own podcast, so we won't elaborate much more here. But no two builders quotes that we have ever seen are anything remotely close to each other. They might be close in price, but what they can, what they're offering, what they're including, what they're excluding, what they are quoting for allowances, for example, on cabinets versus the next guy, saying, hey, do you want custom made cabinets that come from a special wood species in California? Somebody may have quoted that and the other guy didn't. So there's so many things that go into this. And I think it's just really right here is to create the awareness of it's okay to ask for a range of, hey, are you $200 a square foot, or are you $600 a square foot, to be talking in very, very rough terms, because if you're already way off, then you're just trying to see if you're somewhat close at this point so that nobody's wasting each other's time, right? But don't take any of that with certainty, especially earlier on in the conversations. It's just to make sure that, hey, do we think we're even in similar ballparks to continue the conversation, to be respectful of everybody's time. So I hope that makes sense. But there's a whole lot to unpack there.
Yep. Yeah. And you touch on a good point that, builders price things so many different ways, right? And you got to know what they're including in those prices. And just like you said, there's anything from prefab cabinets all the way to specialty custom cabinets, right? And that can affect the price that the overall builder is giving you. And that's where it's not an apples to apples comparison at that point. So that brings up a really good point, but I do like that you touched on, it's totally appropriate to ask for a range at this point. Hey, if we want to build a 2,500 square foot home on a half acre lot, assuming it is flat, little scenarios like that, right? Can you please just give us a range of an estimate for this build, right? And to know, hey, are we talking 200,000? Or are we talking 2 million, right? And the builders can hopefully get you somewhat close with a rough range at that point in the time. But, it's something that as you get further along in the conversations with a couple builders or one specific builder, then the conversation of price will come up. And like Brian said, we'll have a podcast on that later that can really inform you more on what to look for, what to be aware of when those prices are starting to get thrown around. But yeah.
And
I think
something that we like to do specific to us is, we have a very methodical process that we follow with a preliminary building agreement and our fixed price contract approach, so that we do have all the discussions that are necessary and needed for you to make a extremely informed decision on moving forward with us, including a fixed price. But it's much, much further down the road, not when you are working on, hey, what builder do I want to continue the talks with, right? Nobody's going to be able to give you a very accurate estimate early on. They're just not.
Yep. I like that. Well, cool. Should we move on to our last point, unless you have anything else?
Let's do it.
Awesome. I think the best way to wrap this whole episode up, right, is going back to some things that we've touched on in the middle of the episode, but really it all boils down to trusting your instinct, right? And I can truly say that most people know the right decision, right? And sometimes that's clouded by going with the builder that's the cheapest or going with the builder that says they're going to be the fastest, right? but you really have to just go with the builder that feels right in the end, right? The one that you believe is going to be able to accomplish your goal of building your dream custom home on your particular lot, right? That's the ultimate goal, and within budget and within a reasonable timeline. So keeping those facts in mind, that's really what this all boils down to. And hopefully some of these tidbits we've mentioned throughout this episode help you determine that. But really it comes down to feel. So, Brian.
I completely agree. Let's use the word trust one more time. And you have to have complete trust before you ever put yourself in a position where, hey, I've signed a contract with this builder and I feel stuck and I feel like I made the wrong decision, right? That's the last thing we want to see any of you fall within, no matter where you are, no matter who you've chosen, right? That you feel like you've made the wrong decision and you're stuck with this builder for the next 12, 18, 24 months, who knows how long it will take. So I think a good follow-up to this episode, or even a part two, is to talk about an extension of this is what questions should you ask? Again, I talk at the beginning of this episode here that you could ask builders 100, 200, 300 questions, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to cover, a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things to gain clarity around. But what are the most important? What are the right open-ended questions to ask to really get that builder to open up and you get the fastest understanding of, is this someone I want to keep talking to or not, for the sake of your time and theirs, right? Even if you choose not to move forward with them, you're not trying to waste anybody else's time. So, Stephen, I think next episode, I think it makes sense to have some of the top questions. Of course, we're not going to go through 100 questions, but some of them that really get the builder to talk about a lot of different things, and you can quickly learn, hey, this is, I like what I'm hearing, or hey, this makes me have a lot more questions, which is perfectly normal, perfectly fine. I expect that to happen, but now I feel like I'm really getting to understand how this is going to work with this particular builder.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a great part two to follow up with this episode. And I'm sure it's something maybe that we'll even do down the line as well. Another Q&A with the builder, right? When we get more listeners and people that are sending us good feedback on questions that they've had or experiences they've had with builders that they've worked with in the past, it would be great to follow up on another episode like that. But, well, cool. I would say that's a wrap. We're coming up on our time and covered some cool stuff in this episode. And like Brian said, maybe next week we'll jump into questions to ask your builder now that you've got it on a short list, or maybe even down to one builder. So with that being said, I think this wraps it for episode number 5. And I'm Steven. And that's Brian.
I'm Brian.
We'll catch you on the next one.